All right, hello 8th grade. So, conveniently, when we left off before, we were right at the end of a chapter, so we're just going to go ahead and dive right on into chapter 9, which starts off with some scatter plots. So far when we've been graphing things have either ended up in a nice straight line, they've ended up in a nice straight curve. There's been some sort of a definite pattern. Scatter plots are exactly what they sound like, they're a bit more scattered. So, first thing we're going to deal with is a couple of terms that go with them. And the first three are either we have a positive association, a negative association, or we have no association. And a positive association is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Our dots are going to be more or less going in a positive upwards direction. And again, when we're talking about up or down, we're talking about what's happening to our graph as we're going from left to right. So we're going from left to right. So as our dots are going from left to right, they're going more or less up. Now, you might have a few like individual dots where if you're going like from this one to this one, yeah, that's going down. But for the most part, as a general thing, our dots are going up. So the general trend is up. You might have points where you're going down, but most of our points are going in a upwards direction. Again, as we're talking about going from left to right. Okay, negative association is exactly the opposite of that. So instead of going up, our points are going down. Again, more or less. So we have some dots going in a general this way direction. And again, you might have individual places where it looks like it's going up. Like if I'm going from this dot to this dot, yeah, that's going up. But in general, our graph is trending down. So we're going in a general downwards direction. And for right now, if it's not one of those two things, we're going to say it's no association. So if it's not going, just up, or it's not going just down, if we have something kind of like this, where dots are kind of all over the place, we're just going to say for right now, there's no association. There still might be some sort of pattern, but for right now, we're not worried about that. It's either positive, negative, or no. There's just no association there. Okay, so positive if it's going up, negative if it's going down, no association if it's just sort of random like that. The other terms that are going on are either it's linear or it's not. Linear is exactly what it sounds like. It's making more or less a line. So those positive and negative ones that we were just looking at, those were both linear. So linear could either be linear going up, it could be linear going down. Technically, it could also be linear going straight flat across. So any of those three things could be linear. So it's making, again, more or less a line. So it doesn't have to be a perfectly straight line, but if most of your dots are going in a general linear direction, we're going to call that linear. Even if if I play connect the dots here, yeah, that doesn't make a straight line, but in general, our dots are going in a linear direction. Whereas nonlinear would be something like this. So if I start off kind of flat here, and then I just start going up really, 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 really quick. So, not linear. Not a straight line. And there's kind of a bit of a blurry space in between here, like if I have something like this, and then it goes up just there at the end there. Is that linear or not? Because this kind of looks like it is, but then that part's not. So if you're not sure, that's okay. Most of the ones in the example should be pretty clear. It's either linear or it's not. But if you run up against something where you could make a case either way, say what do you think it is, give an explanation as to why, and that's fine. So there could be instances where you could make a case that either it's linear or that no, that's not quite close enough to be a straight line. For the most part, though, it's pretty straightforward. Either this makes a line or it doesn't. A couple other terms going on. If you have a big group of dots that are kind of in the same general area, most of them are doing the same thing, that's called a cluster. So that's a cluster of points, or a I can say cluster of data. If you have a little dot that's out here in the middle of nowhere, that's called an outlier. So clusters are things that are all together. Outliers are one or two dots kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And again, kind of some fuzziness there where, okay, if I have like 5 of them, is that still an outlier or is that now its own cluster? But again, the ones in the examples, they're just going to be 1 or 2 outliers. You're not going to have that kind of medium case where, okay, if you have 5 or 6 of those, does that still count as an outlier or is its own thing now? So it'll be 1 or 2. 1 or 2 is an outlier. Okay. So now, most of what we're doing with this in this first section here is we're making graphs and then we're describing the graphs. So if I have some points here, and hopefully my table showed up well enough that you'll be able to see it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to graph those points. You guys know how to graph points. Again, X is over, Y is up. We've been doing this since like at least 7th grade. I'm pretty sure you guys did some of this in 6th grade too. So if I've got 430, we're over 4, up 30. If we're at 528, over 5, up 28. And again, over and then up is the big thing to watch out for here. So X goes across, Y goes up and down. And we're really just graphing these. So 1022, 1220. I'm guessing this is not the part that's going to be hard. It's just kind of tedious. We got 925. We got 1518. So 1518, right about there-ish. Over one more, actually. Right about there. Hopefully you can see these dots. 1518, 2016. 2213. 1716, 1716. Yep, that was 216. Okay, 2829, kind of over here-ish. 2410. 726. 726. 1812 Overture. 1812 Overture is a piece of music. 1812. 2114. 2114. And there are our points. Cool. So that's the graphing bit. That's the part I'm assuming that you guys probably know how to do at this point. I'm just going to go like this because I left my eraser somewhere else. There you are. Yeah. And the phrase that you're going to see a lot on the homework, I was just double checking what that phrase is. You're going to see the words interpret the graph. So if you want to interpret this graph, the graph. If we want to interpret it, we just basically want to say, what are all the things we can say about this graph? And basically you're looking for a couple things. You're looking for, is it positive, negative, or no association? Is it linear or not? Do we have any clusters? Do we have any outliers? So if it says interpret the graph, you're looking for those things. Positive, negative, or no, linear or not, clusters, outliers. So if we're looking for whether this is positive or negative or no association, again, we're looking at what's happening as we're going from left to right. So left to right, our graph is going more or less down. We got this little point out here that's not, but for the most part, this is going to have a negative association. Cool. And again, linear or not. So positive, negative, no association, linear or not. And more or less, I would say this graph is pretty linear. We're making more or less a straight line here. Again, there are some points that don't exactly fit that line, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfectly linear, just close enough. So this is close enough to linear. And the last thing we're looking for is, do we have clusters? Do we have outliers? And as far as clusters, we pretty much just have this one cluster here. So I'm just going to circle that and label it a cluster. And feel free to do that on the homework as well. If there's a graph that goes with it, feel free to just circle the cluster and label it cluster, rather than trying to write, okay, well, the cluster goes from the point at 4:30 to the point at, no, just circle it, call it a cluster. And then over here, we have one outlier. So you can either draw a little line to it and say, hey, there's my outlier. Or outliers, it's a little bit easier to go, okay, I have one outlier and it's at 28.29. So I could say I have an outlier at, 28.29. So you can either circle it or write it like that. Either one's fine. I don't care. Same thing. You may notice when they say interpret the graph, they give you quite a few lines for this, but this is really what we're looking for. We're looking for, is it positive or negative, or no? Is it linear or not? Do we have clusters? Do we have outliers? So if you get through a couple of lines and go, well, that's pretty much all Miss P said to say, that's it. It's okay if you have lines left. Not a big deal. All right, the last thing that's going on is if I've already got a graph, and I've got a graph of cookies and the price of cookies. Yum. So I want to use that graph to predict the cost of 10 cookies. And this is getting into a little bit of what we're going to be doing in the next section, which has to do with drawing lines of best fit. But for right now, I'm just going to eyeball, okay, well, if these are making more or less a line, I'm looking for where that line is going to cross 10 here. So I'm just going to draw a line up at 10 cookies. And we're looking for more or less because we want to predict, so we're really just estimating, so it's okay if we're not exact. Because these aren't going in a perfectly straight line anyway, so it's okay if our guess isn't perfect. We just want to get close enough. So if I draw more or less a straight line through most of my points, I end up somewhere between 6 and 8, which I'm going to call 7. Between $6 and $8, we're gonna call that 7. And if you were a little bit off, high or low, that's fine. If you called it like 750 or you called it like 650, somewhere in that ballpark. Because again, we're just predicting, so close enough. So we're gonna say that's about $7 for 10 cookies. So if you're looking at the ones where it asks you to make a prediction and you're like double checking those in the back of the book, it's okay if you don't get exactly the same number as the back of the book. That's fine as long as you're somewhere in the same ballpark. So if you drew a slightly different line and said, nah, my line's going to go like this and go through those points instead, and okay, we ended up here closer to 6 than 7, that's fine. Close enough. And that's a bit of what we're going to be getting into next section too, is figuring out, okay, which line is best, how do I find an equation for that line, how do we maybe use that line to predict things that aren't on this graph. Like if I said 20, that goes off my graph. Now my line doesn't go up far enough, so how do we figure that out? And that's what we're getting into next section, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So that should be it as far as this section. Go ahead and check out the homework in the description below. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns. You can either throw something in the comments section if you think it's something that other people might have a question about, or you can email me if you just got like something a bit more one-on-one. That's fine. Either one's good, and I will see you in the next section.